As I was reading the statement a little earlier, even how you frame, this application, it's about race-based, when in fact we know the history of our country and why some of these policies have had to be adopted given our past.
Well, I think that we are very specifically challenging regulations promulgated under the Preferential Procurement Act. And under these regulations, it allows parastatals to set pre-qualification criteria. That is, before even considering a tender, they are now allowed under these regulations to set an absolute barrier and disallow certain people based on their race from even being considered. Now, of course, that we consider that unfair to the people being dismissed out of hand instead of looking at the merits of what they have to offer as contractors to, let's say, Eskom. But we also think that it's unfair to consumers who, in the end, don't get access to electricity and electricity services provisions from all the from everybody at the table. So we'd like to echo the statements made by Minister Gordhan earlier last week, I think, that the electricity crisis is so severe we need everybody at the table. And so we're not saying, we're not challenging at this point, and I think there should be a debate about BE in general, but this is not what we're about. We're asking that it shouldn't be acceptable to set an absolute barrier and say, we're not even going to consider you if you're white in this case. What we're saying is, let's get everybody on the table and even continue with BE scoring, etc., but let's not dismiss people out of hand.
But that's not what preferential procurement, BEE, employment equity actually advocates for. Let's put aside for a second what the crooks and the looters, have done over the years, where they have really done the unthinkable. I mean, that has nothing to do with employment equity and BEE. They've simply vulgarized it. But you should know that given our history, something had to be done to bring other people who didn't enjoy the privileges that you and people who have the same color of skin have had to enjoy in the past. Isn't that really the truth? And we are really confusing and clouding issues here.
Well, it's a little crash to just dismiss people out of hand based on their color. And I don't think that our conversation should be on this level.
No, I'm saying that's what apartheid did.
That we're introducing in this case. I'm saying that there's an electricity crisis in the country and that there are currently regulations that out of hand dismiss contractors based on race. Now, we're not challenging BEE at this point and a lot of regulation. We're saying that some of these regulations, the regulations that set an absolute barrier, and there are constitutional cases on this matter and that we'd like to draw from. But we say, at the very least, let's agree that we will consider all tenders at the table, and we'll score them even on BEE. But let's not dismiss them out of hand if they are not of the right skin color. Let's just get everybody at the table, because what in the end matters is not the contractors, but what in the end matters is, have South African electricity consumers, all of us, had access to the best of the pool, the total pool available? Have we considered every possible contribution? That's what we're asking.
Where are these regulations, and what exactly do they say?
Yes. So in 2016, a new preferential procurement regulations, not the Act, some regulations were promulgated, and this happened in the term of then Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan. And these regulations have specific problems with them. So you can look at the 2017 regulations, that's when they were promulgated, and we saw then over the months after the promulgation that these SOEs like Eskom started using these regulations. So this is a very specifically new legislative development, and we're arguing that these regulations are actually outside and in conflict with the Preferential Procurement Act of 2000. So we're not challenging the Preferential Procurement Act. We're challenging some regulations that we're saying are in conflict with the Preferential Procurement Act, and actually it works contra the objectives of what there were.
What do they specifically ask people to do or not do? I think for the sake of our viewers who may not be as privy to them as you seem to be, can you just elaborate a little bit more?
Thank you, Vuyo, because these regulations do fly under the radar, and I think so. I'd like to shine some light upon them. The regulations that we're talking about was promulgated in 2017, and what they said is that whereas the Preferential Procurement Act very specifically says what is allowed and what is not as for the pre-qualification of a tender, and that is things like can the contractor actually deliver tax clearances, all that sort of stuff, technical specifications, whether a tender can be considered. And what these regulations then came and did is they said, no, we're actually going to allow SOEs to set additional minimum criteria outside the bounds of the Preferential Procurement Act. And these regulations are what Eskom and other SOEs have now used to introduce BEE pre-qualifications where actually just technical specifications should be considered. Now BEE is actually on par with these technical considerations, and then that creates an absolute barrier between who can be at the table and who can't be based on race. And so we're saying that just limits the pool of what's available to either SOEs, of Eskom, or any other.